One of the most disturbing elements of the Prohibition War is how it's made police the enemy of otherwise law-abiding cannabis consumers. Fortunately, one group of police officers knows the futility of prohibition and reaches out to educate the community and current law enforcement. Today, the Russ Belville Show visits with another speaker from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition with one clear message. Cops say legalize drugs.
Welcome back, everyone. 31 and a half after the hour. Time for Cops Say Legalize Drugs. And joining us on the telephone, we've got Rusty White. He's a former K-9 trainer and corrections officer. Rusty, welcome to the show. Hello, Rusty. Do we have you on the line? Hold on just a second. Got a problem here in the studio. There we go. Rusty, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry about that. I had you on mute. Glad to have you here, sir. And where are you? You're in Bridgeport, Texas. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Just north of Fort Worth.
Oh, fantastic. All right. We've got some good friends there with the Dallas-Fort Worth Normal chapter. Love that area of the country. Interested here in your background, particularly your training of K-9 officers. It's been quite interesting as 4 states now have legalized marijuana. There's this question of what happens now with the K-9 dogs. Can you give us some of your opinions on that?
Well, it depends on the type of training they've had. Sometimes you can take a dog and train him in a different direction. But most readily, the dogs are probably no longer of use to the department, and they'll have to go home with a handler.
So if a dog had previously been trained to alert to cannabis, to marijuana, can it be detrained to not alert on that anymore? Or is that like a permanent thing? They're stuck with it?
No, they're stuck with it. They'll still alert on cannabis, but depending on the age of the dog and the type of attitude the dog has, you can retrain them to do other things.
Okay.
But that all depends on the age of the dog.
Okay. I'd read some reports, I believe up in Washington State, where they were just no longer having the dogs be trained. The new dogs, they were having them no longer be trained for marijuana because obviously a dog can't tell you how many ounces it smells. As this happens, what are some of the other things they would train the dogs to do? Explosives detection or protection, or what would they do?
There again, it depends on the dog itself. Each dog is its own individual case. So you can't say that this dog can be trained to do one thing unless, like I said, it's an individual case on each canine.
Okay. But
the fact of using a canine to do marijuana searches is kind of absurd anyway.
And what's the problem with it?
Well, if you're at Circle K or getting a soda pop somewhere and a gentleman or a lady gets out of the car and puts their hands on your car and they've got the resin from marijuana on their hands when they touch your car, that scent will stay there for 24 hours at 70 miles an hour.
Wow.
So if you put a dog on the outside of a vehicle that's claimed that's reasonable cause to search, it's just bull.
Wow. That's something I'd never even considered before. We've told a lot of stories about the studies where they show the handlers will make the dogs false alert, sometimes unconsciously. But this one where you could just accidentally be the victim of someone just touching your car, that's remarkable.
Well, not only that, if you take a car in for service and the guy who's changing your oil or working on your car, changing your tires, you can have your vehicle contaminated by the public and through no fault of your own, then have a dog put on the outside of your car and have it marked. And that's just wrong. That's just wrong.
Absolutely. I'm glad you have that perspective. When you were training the dogs and they were being used, did that concern you at the time? Did you bring this up to anyone?
Oh, yeah. I was in Department of Corrections from 1973 to 78. I worked death row and admin seg in Florence, Arizona. And I've seen a lot of killings, a lot of rapes involved over drugs inside the walls. Then I went back in the system in 88 and 89, and that's when I became a narc dog handler and track attack dog handler. But unfortunately, or fortunately, to me, I feel it's a blessing. My conscience would no longer participate in the farce.
Yeah, and in reading your bio here and having worked in the correctional facilities, I'm sure you saw the revolving door of people coming in and, repeatedly, recidivism. And it had to be, I imagine it must be frustrating to see real criminals being released while someone who planted a pot garden is still serving a mandatory sentence.
Well, it's even more disgusting today. You know, back in my day, we didn't have prisons for profit. Now you got people who are essentially in the cattle ranching business. And when you got more people in prison who have no victim or violence in their crime, that says something real bad about us as a society. We're feeding on people. That's all they are. It's a people ranching business.
A people ranching business. We're speaking to Rusty White with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. They got all sorts of great speakers like Rusty at LEAP. You can check them out at leap.cc. One of them can come out and speak to your local group and tell the truth about the war on drugs. Now, Rusty, you mentioned the private prisons and the for-profit nature of the prison industry, but there's also this for-profit nature to policing with asset forfeiture and those related articles. What can you tell people about that angle of the drug war?
Well, it's utterly disgraceful and disgusting when you take our profession and turn them into essentially looters. That's my belief about forfeitures. You know, they're taking property and money away from people and not even charging them. And it causes them to want to do more of it because they get the loot that comes from this illegal activity. In my mind, it's illegal. It's a disgrace to our profession.
Very well spoken. And this drug war, as it rages on, you know, a lot of the attention these days is to marijuana legalization. But Law Enforcement Against Prohibition takes a broader stance and says that all drugs should be legalized to some extent. What would you like to see happen? And how would we convince people that seem to be accepting now of legalizing pot, but are still afraid of meth and coke and all these other drugs?
Well, the first thing you ask them, if we legalize heroin tomorrow, would you do it? Nobody in their right mind would say, yeah, I'm going to be first in line. So that's a fallacy right there. We got to look at other countries around the world, Portugal, Switzerland, the people who've had success, not following our known failure. You know, this is an issue that should be addressed like a medical issue. If somebody lets them their choices get the better of them, they don't need to be locked in a cell away from their families. They need medical attention. They need assistance. You don't destroy families. You don't flashbang babies in cribs over people who have harmed nobody, who have no victim or violence in their crimes, supposed crimes, just to feed a people ranching business. It's asinine.
Now,
and one other thing I'd like to bring up is, you know, I worked in a maximum security prison with 40-foot walls, snitches, every modern technology in the world for surveillance. And if you cannot keep drugs out of a maximum security prison, there is not a prison or a jail on this planet that drugs have not been found in. If you cannot keep them out of there, how on earth do you expect to keep them out of the freest country on earth?
Yeah, it's impossible. And we have great folks like you at Law Enforcement Against Prohibition to remind people of that you can either be free or drug free, but you can't be both. That's very well put.
It's sad.
Now, you're in Texas and you'd worked in the prison in Arizona. Both states very, very anti-drug. I mean, the pot laws in Arizona are terrible, and Texas isn't that far off. What is it going to take to change the minds of rural and conservative, some folks that are religious, in wanting to follow LEAP's guidance here in ending prohibition?
Well, unfortunately, we've got about 50 years of propaganda and mind conditioning to get over. I would tell everybody that, believe it or not, addiction is a very terrible thing. Unfortunately, there's several different types of addictions. And we have people addicted to the money, the power, the job security of the drug war, that we got more people addicted to that than we do people addicted to drugs. And the hardest thing for these people to do, number one, is admit they were wrong. Because you got to look in that mirror and realize that you've been terrorizing families and destroying families when it wasn't warranted. And that's the hardest thing we have to get by, is people have to start looking in the mirror and say, wait a minute. And taxpayers got to start standing up and say, we're tired of paying for this. We're tired of paying for this when it's BS. We got to take a stand and go over reality, common sense. No more, make up what you want to make up. Go with reality and common sense and documented history. If it hadn't worked in 50 years, look at the harm we've done. Supposed freest nation on earth, and we got more people behind bars than any other country. That's sad. That's just truly sad.
Thinking about this from a red state perspective, I'm reminded of the words of President Ronald Reagan, who said, if you want more of something, subsidize it. If you want less of something, tax it. It seems like we've subsidized prisons instead of taxing drugs.
Exactly. And when like I say, with these prisons for profit, it's disgusting. Their sole goal is to make money. The way you make money, you have to keep feeding people to it. And right here in Texas, they're guaranteed a certain percentage of the population. And what is wrong with that picture?
Yeah, assuming that
the majority of these people have no victim or violence in their crime.
Yeah, and just the assumption that there ought to be a set number of prisoners, like there should always be that much crime. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
In Texas, I built 9 prisons here in Texas in construction. And they always pick a little community out in nowhere that has no economic base or nothing. And you put these prisons there. That brings money into the community. That gives people jobs. And therefore, you more or less get support for your ideas by making it a place where people can have jobs and make a living. But you're making jobs on people that shouldn't be there. That's sad.
Absolutely correct. It's we've been speaking with Rusty White, a former K-9 trainer, corrections officer, sniper for the Department of Corrections. He's out of Bridgeport, Texas, and a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We've got about 30 seconds, Rusty. Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
All I would ask is everybody start to wake up and stand up. The only way this is going to change, when your daughters and sons are being put in these prisons for profit, you have to stand up. We as taxpayers and parents, mothers, fathers, have to start standing up and voicing the truth. We can't go down this path any longer.
It's great speaking with you, Rusty. Really appreciate the work you're doing there in Texas and, of course, everything that Law Enforcement Against Prohibition is up to. Thanks so much for joining us.
Anytime, brother. Give me a call.
We'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure. All right, folks, stay tuned. We've got a little bit of time here for the anti-drug public service announcement of the day, just so we can be fair and balanced. And then when we come back from that, it's time for a radical rant. We're going to discuss, imagine there's no alcohol. It's not easy if you try. The radical rant's coming up. Stay tuned.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.